Montana Territory, 1873. The last embers of sunset burned across the western sky as Finn Voss urged his weary mount toward the faint glow of lamplight in the distance. 3 months riding solo along the northern cattle trails had left him with little more than trail dust, a worn saddle, and the companionship of a loyal paint horse. At 25, the lines around his eyes had less to do with age than with squinting across endless prairie under a merciless sun. "What do you say, Thunder? Think they'll have a decent meal waiting?" he murmured, patting the horse's neck. The animal nickered softly in response, perhaps sensing the prospect of grain and shelter ahead. The Broken Spoke Ranch appeared as most frontier homesteads did, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the elements, defiant in their solitude. A main house constructed of rough-hewn logs stood sentinel over a modest barn and corral. Unlike many such places, however, this one showed signs of prosperity. The fences stood straight, the barn roof was intact, and fat cattle dotted the nearby pasture. Finn approached cautiously, one hand resting near his holster. 8 years on the frontier had taught him that hospitality wasn't guaranteed, especially for a drifter with little to his name beyond his horse, saddle, and reputation as a skilled wrangler. "Hello, the house," he called out, stopping a respectful distance from the main building. The door swung open, revealing a barrel-chested man with a beard as wild as the territory itself. A rifle rested comfortably in his weathered hands, neither threatening nor entirely welcoming. "State your business, stranger," the man called. "Finn Voss, sir. I've been working cattle north of here." "Looking for a fair day's work and maybe a meal." Finn remained in place, hands visible. "I heard in town that Harold Buchanan might be looking for hands." The older man's posture relaxed slightly. "You heard right, I'm Buchanan. Got 500 head needing to be driven to the railway station in Billings." He studied Finn with shrewd eyes. "You look young for a drover, got experience." 8 years riding trails from Texas to Montana. "Started when I was 17, Finn answered, feeling the familiar weight of his past. "I can break horses, mend fences, and get your herd where it needs to go." Buchanan nodded slowly. "We'll see about that. For now, you can stable your horse and get some food. Martha," he called over his shoulder, "set another plate." As Finn dismounted, he caught sight of movement in an upstairs window. A woman's face quickly vanished behind a curtain. Something in that brief glimpse, vulnerability perhaps, or simple curiosity, struck him oddly, but he dismissed the thought. The frontier was no place for distractions. Men who lost focus ended up dead. "No family out here with you?" Buchanan asked as they walked toward the barn. Finn shook his head. "No, sir, just me." "Smart man, the frontier's no place for sentiment. It'll get you killed quicker than a Blackfoot arrow." Buchanan's laugh was as dry as prairie grass. "A man alone can move quick, make decisions without worrying about a woman's feelings or a child's safety." Finn nodded politely, but the words found their mark. They reinforced what he'd learned through bitter experience. Attachment was dangerous on the frontier. Love was a luxury that most couldn't afford and fewer survived. His parents' broken homestead in Nebraska Territory stood testament to that truth, their graves unmarked except in his memory. The West demands everything, Finn thought, and gives precious little in return. Dinner was a quiet affair in the ranch house kitchen. Martha Buchanan, a thin woman with tired eyes, served beef stew without conversation. Buchanan dominated what little talk there was, outlining the cattle drive scheduled to begin in 3 days' time. Finn responded when necessary, his attention more on the hot meal than the conversation. It was only when he heard the stairs creak that he looked up. A young woman paused in the doorway, uncertainty written across her delicate features. She was perhaps 20, with honey-blonde hair pulled back in a simple braid and eyes the color of a summer sky. Her calico dress was modest but couldn't disguise her natural beauty. "Ah, there you are," Buchanan said. "This here's Abigail." "My daughter." The girl nodded slightly but didn't speak. Finn noticed how her hands twisted nervously in her apron. "Ma'am," Finn acknowledged with a respectful nod. "She'll be keeping to herself while you're here," Buchanan added, his tone suddenly hard. "Got no reason to speak with the hands." Finn returned his attention to his food, but not before noticing the flash of something like resignation in Abigail's eyes. It wasn't his business, he reminded himself. He'd be gone soon enough, back on the trail where he belonged. Later that evening, as Finn settled into the bunkhouse, another ranch hand, a grizzled man called Peterson, offered unsolicited information. "Saw you looking at the boss's daughter," he said, lighting a smoke. "Word of advice, don't." Finn shrugged, wasn't looking. "Good, keep it that way. Old man's mighty protective. She's damaged goods anyway." Finn frowned. "Meaning?" Peterson lowered his voice. "Heard the boss talking when he was in his cups. Girl can't have children, some female trouble." He tapped his belly significantly. "Buchanan's tried to marry her off twice. Both times the men backed out when they learned." "That's her private business," Finn said, uncomfortable with the gossip. "Nothing's private on the frontier," Peterson replied, "especially when her father's trying to arrange a third match with a widower from Helena. Man's got 5 kids already and needs a mother for them, doesn't care if she can't have more." Finn said nothing, but the information settled uneasily. He'd seen his share of such arrangements, marriages based on necessity rather than affection. The frontier demanded practical solutions to practical problems. Still, something about the sadness in Abigail's eyes had struck him. He recognized it as the same hollowness he sometimes glimpsed in his own reflection. The next morning brought Finn face to face with Abigail in the stables. He was checking Thunder's shoe when she entered, carrying a small bucket of feed for a chestnut mare. "Oh," she startled upon seeing him, "I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was here." "No need for apologies, Miss Buchanan. I'm just tending to my horse." Finn straightened, dusting off his hands on his denims. She approached the neighboring stall cautiously. "That's a fine paint you have." "Thank you, his name's Thunder." Finn patted the horse's flank. "He's gotten me through some tight spots." A small smile touched her lips. "Horses are better companions than most people, I find." "Often true," Finn agreed, then nodding toward her mare, "She's a beauty." "This is Penny," Abigail said, her voice softening with affection. "Father gave her to me on my 16th birthday. She's the one thing that's truly mine." She stroked the horse's nose with gentle fingers. The moment of connection was broken by the sound of boots on the stable floor. Harold Buchanan appeared, his expression darkening at the sight of them talking. "Abigail, what are you doing out here?" he demanded. "Just feeding Penny, father," she answered, her voice suddenly smaller. "Mrs. Peterson can see to that." "You're needed in the house." He turned his gaze to Finn. "And you, I need fence mended on the north pasture, now." "Yes, sir," Finn replied evenly. "I'll get right to it." As he gathered his tools, he couldn't help noticing how Abigail's shoulders hunched under her father's scrutiny, how the light that had briefly animated her features extinguished like a candle in a draught. It wasn't his concern, he reminded himself. The less entangled he became, the better. 3 grueling days passed as the ranch prepared for the cattle drive. Finn worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, checking tack, and preparing supplies. He caught only glimpses of Abigail, a flash of blonde hair at a window, a silhouette in the garden, a distant figure on her chestnut mare riding the far reaches of the property. On the eve of the drive, Buchanan summoned Finn to the main house. "You've proven yourself capable," the rancher said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "I want you to ride point with me on this drive." "Thank you, sir," Finn replied, accepting the drink. "There's good money in it if we get the herd to Billings without major losses." Buchanan took a long swallow. "And I might have more work for you after if you're interested in staying on." Before Finn could respond, the front door opened. Abigail entered, accompanied by a man Finn hadn't seen before, tall, heavyset, with the ruddy complexion of someone who enjoyed his liquor. "Ah, perfect timing," Buchanan exclaimed. "Finn, this here is James Walton from Helena. He's come to meet Abigail." The introduction was met with strained silence. Abigail's face was carefully composed, but Finn noticed her white-knuckled grip on her shawl. "Pleasure," Walton said to Finn without much interest before turning his attention to Buchanan. "Harold, I thought we might discuss the arrangements in private." Of course, Finn, you're dismissed. We'll talk more about the drive tomorrow." As Finn left, he heard Walton say, "My children need a mother's care, and while it's unfortunate about her condition, I suppose it's a blessing in disguise. 5 is plenty." The words followed Finn into the night air. He paused on the porch, troubled by the conversation. The cool evening breeze did little to dispel his unease. A soft sound drew his attention to the side of the house. Abigail stood there, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the darkness. "Miss Buchanan," he said quietly, "are you all right?" She turned, quickly wiping at her eyes. "Mr. Voss, yes, I'm fine. Just needed some air." Finn stepped closer, conscious of propriety but concerned by her obvious distress. "I don't mean to intrude, but—" "Then don't," she interrupted, a surprising flash of spirit in her voice. She immediately softened. "I apologize, that was rude." "No need to apologize to me," Finn said. "I understand wanting to be left alone." Something in his tone must have resonated with her because she looked at him more directly. "Do you understand that, I mean?" Finn leaned against the porch railing. "I've spent most of my life alone on the frontier. It's safer that way." "Safer," she echoed. "Yes, I suppose it is. No one to disappoint. No one to hurt you." The vulnerability in her words touched something in Finn that he'd long buried, a recognition of shared loneliness. "Your father mentioned arrangements with Mr. Walton," he said carefully. Abigail's laugh held no humor. "Did he tell you he's selling me? Not in so many words, of course, but that's what it amounts to." She turned to face him fully. "Do you know what it's like to be considered worthless, Mr. Voss? To be bartered like damaged goods?" The rawness of her pain startled him. "You're not." "I am, according to my father, to potential husbands, to everyone. A woman who can't bear children has little value on the frontier." She drew a shaky breath. "Mr. Walton needs someone to raise his existing children. He doesn't care that I can't give him more. My father is offering a substantial dowry to compensate for my deficiency." Finn felt a surge of anger on her behalf but kept his voice steady. "That doesn't seem right." "Right has nothing to do with it. This is the frontier. Practicality rules here." She looked away. "I should go inside before I'm missed." As she turned to leave, Finn spoke without thinking. "Miss Buchanan, would you like to go riding tomorrow, before the drive begins?" Surprise crossed her features. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I think we both could use the open air," he answered simply. "No expectations, just horses and horizon." For a moment he thought she would refuse, then a small, genuine smile touched her lips. "Dawn. Before anyone else is awake." "I'll be at the stables," he promised. As he watched her disappear into the house, Finn wondered what he was doing. Getting involved wasn't in his plans. Attachment was dangerous. And yet, the thought of Abigail being traded like property to a man who saw her only as a convenience stirred something protective in him. "You're a fool, Voss," he muttered to himself. But he knew he would be at the stables when the first light touched the eastern sky. The dawn air carried a hint of autumn's approach as Finn waited by the stables. Part of him doubted she would come. The wiser part hoped she wouldn't. This impulse to connect was dangerous, a distraction he couldn't afford. But then she was there, slipping through the early morning shadows in a riding skirt and simple blouse, her hair loosely braided. The smile she offered was tentative but real. "You came," she said, as if she'd harbored the same doubts about him. "Said I would." Finn had already saddled both horses. He helped her mount Penny, trying to ignore the warmth of her hand in his, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her. They rode in companionable silence at first, putting distance between themselves and the ranch house. The prairie stretched around them, bathed in the golden light of dawn, vast and somehow forgiving in its emptiness. Finally, on a rise overlooking a meandering creek, Abigail pulled up her horse. "Thank you for this," she said, gazing at the landscape. "I haven't ridden beyond the property in months." "Why not?" Finn asked, stopping thunder alongside her. "Father doesn't approve of me riding alone, says it's not proper." She brushed a strand of hair from her face. "After my mother died 5 years ago, he became protective. Controlling, really. And now he's arranging your marriage to Walton." Abigail's hands tightened on her reins. "It's the third match he's tried to make. The first 2 fell through when they learned about my condition." She looked directly at him, her blue eyes clear in the morning light. "I suppose Peterson told you about that." Finn nodded, not wanting to lie. It wasn't his place to share such personal information. "Nothing stays private long in these parts," she sighed. "When I was 16, I fell ill with a fever. The doctor said afterward that I would never bear children. My father has considered me damaged ever since." "That's not fair," Finn said quietly. Life rarely is, Mr. Voss, especially out here. She turned her gaze back to the horizon. You must think me terribly forward, sharing such things. I think you're honest, he replied, and I think you deserve better than to be bartered to a man who sees you only as a convenient solution to his problems. Her smile was sad. What choice do I have? Women alone don't survive the frontier. The truth of her words struck Finn hard. The West was merciless to those without protection. He'd seen the graves, heard the stories. What would you do? He asked. If you could choose. Abigail seemed surprised by the question, as if no one had ever asked before. I'd have my own place, she said slowly. Small but mine. I'd raise horses, good ones. I understand horses. Her voice gained strength as she continued. I'd plant a garden with vegetables and flowers, have chickens, maybe some goats. It wouldn't be grand, but it would be mine. The longing in her words resonated with something in Finn, a buried desire for belonging he'd denied for years. That sounds like a fine dream, he said, but that's all it is, a dream. Reality is Mr. Walton and his 5 children who have already lost one mother. She straightened her shoulders. We should head back. As they rode toward the ranch, Finn felt an unfamiliar turmoil. He'd spent years avoiding entanglement, focusing on survival alone. But Abigail's quiet dignity in the face of her circumstances stirred something he'd thought long buried, a need to protect, to care for someone beyond himself. They reached the stables just as the ranch was coming to life. Abigail dismounted quickly. Thank you for this morning, she said. It was freeing. We could go again, Finn suggested, surprising himself. After the cattle drive. That's 2 weeks away. My father intends to finalize the arrangement with Mr. Walton before then. She hesitated, then added softly, but thank you for the thought. As she turned to leave, Finn called after her, Miss Buchanan, Abigail. Just because you can't bear children doesn't make you worth any less. Some men would see that. She looked back, a flicker of something like hope crossing her features before she schooled them back to resignation. Some men, perhaps. But not here, not now. The cattle drive began later that morning, 500 head of Hereford cattle destined for the railway at Billings. Finn rode point alongside Buchanan, while Peterson and 3 other hands managed the flanks and rear of the herd. As they departed, Finn caught a glimpse of Abigail standing on the porch, a solitary figure watching them leave. The image stayed with him as they moved across the rolling prairie, a persistent reminder of unfinished business. The first few days passed uneventfully. The cattle moved well, the weather held, and the men fell into the rhythm of the trail. Buchanan proved to be a knowledgeable cattleman, if not a particularly warm companion. His conversation centered mainly on the price he hoped to fetch in Billings and complaints about the increasing settlement of the territory. Too many people coming in, he grumbled on the 4th night as they sat around the campfire. Government giving away land to anyone who can fog a mirror. It was better when a man could claim what he could hold. Times change, Peterson remarked. That's why you're smart to settle Abigail with Walton. Man's got connections in Helena. Political aspirations, they say. Finn kept his attention on his coffee, trying to ignore the conversation. Walton's offering good terms, Buchanan agreed. Not easy finding a match for a barren woman, even with a sizable dowry. He doesn't care since he's already got his heirs. When's the wedding to be? One of the younger hands asked. Soon as we get back, papers are being drawn up. He's staying at the ranch now, getting to know her. Buchanan chuckled, not that she has much say in the matter. The thought of Abigail alone with Walton sent an uncomfortable spike of concern through Finn. He'd seen the man only briefly, but something about him had felt wrong, an assessment based on instinct rather than evidence. Does she want to marry him? Finn asked before he could stop himself. The question drew surprised looks from the others. Buchanan's eyes narrowed. What concern is it of yours, Voss? Just curious, Finn said, trying to sound casual. She seemed reluctant. She's a woman. They're always reluctant until they're not, Buchanan replied dismissively. Abigail knows her place and her value or lack of it. Walton is offering security. That's more than most in her position could hope for. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Finn remained troubled. That night, as he took his turn on watch, he found himself staring back in the direction of the Broken Spoke Ranch, wondering what was happening there. The concern bothered him. Attachment to anyone or anything was a vulnerability he couldn't afford. Yet the image of Abigail's sad eyes and quiet dignity haunted him. On the seventh day, disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the west, bringing lightning that spooked the cattle. The resulting stampede scattered the herd across miles of broken country. By the time they regained control, they'd lost nearly 50 head, and one of the hands had suffered a broken arm when his horse fell in the chaos. "We'll have to split up," Buchanan decided grimly. "Peterson, you stay with Miller and the main herd. Move them toward that creek we passed yesterday. They need water and there's good grazing. Voss, you come with me to look for the strays. Jenkins, take Williams back to the ranch for proper medical attention." The next 3 days were grueling. Finn and Buchanan rode from dawn until dusk, locating and driving scattered groups of cattle back toward the main herd. The work was exhausting, but Finn welcomed the physical demands that kept his mind from wandering back to thoughts of Abigail. On the afternoon of the third day, as they were tracking a group of about 15 head through a narrow canyon, Buchanan's horse stepped into a prairie dog hole and went down hard. The rancher was thrown clear but landed awkwardly. His cry of pain told Finn immediately that something was seriously wrong. "Don't move," Finn instructed, dismounting quickly. A brief examination confirmed his fears. Buchanan's leg was broken, the bone visibly misaligned beneath his denims. "Damn it all," Buchanan groaned through gritted teeth. "This is all I need." "We need to splint it and get you back to the ranch," Finn said, already looking around for suitable materials. "It's closest and you need a doctor." The journey back was slow and painful. Finn fashioned a crude travois from branches and his bedroll, securing Buchanan as comfortably as possible before starting the long trek home. The older man drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain and shock taking their toll. It was near midnight when they finally approached the Broken Spoke. Lights still burned in the main house, and Finn's shout brought several figures running: Martha Buchanan, Peterson, and Jenkins, who had evidently returned from delivering the injured Williams. "Harold," Martha cried, seeing her husband's condition. "His leg's broken," Finn explained as they carefully transferred Buchanan onto a door that would serve as a stretcher. "Bad break. He needs a doctor." "Jenkins, ride for Doc Bailey in Sweetwater," Martha ordered. "Tell him to come immediately." As they carried Buchanan into the house, Finn caught sight of Abigail standing at the foot of the stairs, her face pale with concern. Beside her stood Walton, his expression more annoyed than worried. "What happened?" Abigail asked as they passed. "Horse stepped in a hole," Finn answered briefly. "Your father was thrown." They settled Buchanan in the main bedroom. Martha fussed over him while Peterson went to prepare more lanterns. Finn found himself alone in the hallway with Abigail and Walton. "This is most inconvenient," Walton muttered. "We were to sign the contracts tomorrow." "My father's injury is hardly convenient for anyone, Mr. Walton," Abigail replied, a note of steel in her voice that surprised Finn. Walton waved a dismissive hand. Of course. "I merely meant the timing is unfortunate. I must return to Helena by month's end." He turned to Finn. "How long do these things typically take to heal?" 6 weeks at least," Finn replied, "possibly longer." Walton's frown deepened. "That won't do at all. The contracts must be signed with or without his participation." "He's in no condition to conduct business," Abigail protested. "Nonsense. Once the doctor has seen to him, he'll be lucid enough to sign his name. The terms are already agreed upon." Walton's gaze swept over Abigail in a way that made Finn's jaw tighten. "I've waited quite long enough to secure our arrangement." Before either could respond, Martha emerged from the bedroom. "He's asking for you, Abigail." As Abigail slipped past, Martha turned to Finn. "Thank you for bringing him home. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry." Finn nodded his thanks but found his appetite had vanished. Instead, he went outside to tend to Thunder and check on Buchanan's injured horse. The night air was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. He took a deep breath, trying to clear his head. The sound of the door opening made him turn. Abigail stood on the porch, her slender form silhouetted against the lamplight. "Father's resting now," she said, coming to stand beside him. "The doctor should be here by morning." That's good, Finn glanced at her. How are you holding up? She gave a small, humorless laugh. You're the first person to ask that. She wrapped her arms around herself against the night chill. I'm worried for him, of course. He's my father, despite everything. And Walton, he seems eager to proceed. Abigail's expression tightened. Mr. Walton is concerned primarily with his schedule. He's made it clear that my father's condition won't delay our arrangement. Can he do that without your father's active participation? The contracts are drawn. Father needs only to sign. She looked away, and I have little say in the matter. Finn felt a surge of protectiveness. You always have a say, Abigail, it's your life. Is it? She challenged quietly. What would you have me do, run away? To what? Women alone don't survive out here. I have no money, no property, no skills beyond keeping house. You understand horses, Finn said, remembering their conversation. You have dreams of your own. Dreams don't feed you or keep you safe, she sighed. Mr. Walton is offering security if the price is my happiness. Well, that's a luxury few can afford on the frontier. It shouldn't be that way, Finn said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. No, she agreed softly. It shouldn't. She turned to go back inside, then paused. Thank you for bringing my father home safely, and for seeing me, not many do. As she disappeared into the house, Finn remained in the yard, troubled by emotions he'd long kept at bay. For years he'd believed that survival on the frontier meant remaining unattached, unburdened by connections that could become vulnerabilities. It was a philosophy born of bitter experience, watching his parents struggle and ultimately fail to carve a life from the unforgiving plains. But something about Abigail challenged that belief. Her quiet strength in the face of circumstances beyond her control, her dreams deferred but not abandoned, stirred something long dormant in him, a desire not just to survive but to live. To connect, the realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. The next morning brought Doc Bailey, a gruff older man who confirmed what Finn already knew: Buchanan's leg was badly broken and would require weeks of immobilization to heal properly. He's not to be moved, the doctor instructed Martha firmly. No riding, no ranching, nothing but rest for at least 6 weeks. But the cattle drive, Buchanan protested weakly from his bed. The herd needs to get to Billings. The herd will have to wait, the doctor replied unsympathetically. Can't afford to wait, Buchanan muttered. Prices are good now, delay could cost me thousands. From his position near the door, Finn cleared his throat. I could take them, he offered. I know the trail to Billings. Peterson and the others can manage the herd. All eyes turned to him. Buchanan studied him suspiciously. Why would you do that? Because you hired me to help get those cattle to market, Finn replied simply. That job's not done. Buchanan's eyes narrowed in calculation. And your cut, you expecting more for taking charge. Same as agreed, I'm not looking to profit from your misfortune. A long silence followed as Buchanan weighed his options. Finally, he nodded. All right, Voss, you take them. Peterson knows which cattle buyer to see in Billings. He gestured toward a drawer in the bedside table. Martha, get my papers. I'll write a letter of authorization for Voss to act as my agent. As Martha moved to comply, Walton spoke up from where he'd been observing. This seems a fortuitous solution. With the cattle drive proceeded, we can attend to our own business without delay. Buchanan nodded. The contracts can wait until you're stronger, Abigail interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm. All eyes turned to her in surprise. Mr. Walton can surely understand that your health must come first, Father. Walton's expression darkened. I understood this matter was decided. It is, Buchanan said, glaring at his daughter. And a broken leg doesn't change that. The contracts will be signed today. Abigail's shoulders slumped slightly, but she nodded in acquiescence. Finn felt a surge of frustration at her capitulation, but reminded himself it wasn't his place to interfere. He'd offered to complete the cattle drive out of a sense of obligation and fairness, not to involve himself in Buchanan family matters. Yet as he prepared to leave with Peterson to rejoin the herd, he found himself lingering, reluctant to depart while Abigail's fate was being sealed. He found her in the stables brushing Penny with methodical strokes that seemed more about comforting herself than grooming the horse. I'm heading out, he said simply. She nodded without looking up. Safe travels, Mr. Voss. Finn, he corrected gently. After everything, I think we're past formalities. A small smile touched her lips, though her eyes remained sad. Finn, then. I don't want to overstep, but he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Are you certain about this arrangement with Walton? Abigail's hand stilled on the brush. Does it matter what I want? It should. She finally looked at him, her blue eyes searching his face. Why do you care? You barely know me. It was a fair question, and one Finn had asked himself repeatedly over the past days. I'm not entirely sure, he admitted, but I know what it's like to feel trapped by circumstances. To believe there's no choice but to accept what life hands you. And is there, she challenged quietly, a choice, I mean? There's always a choice, Finn replied. Sometimes neither option is good, but there's always a choice. Abigail resumed brushing, her movements less certain. What would you do if you were me? I can't answer that, Finn said honestly. But I do know this, a lifetime with someone who sees you as convenient rather than cherished is a high price to pay for security. And the alternative? Poverty, disgrace, becoming a burden on others. Or finding your own way, Finn suggested. You said yourself you understand horses, that's a valuable skill. She laughed without humor, a woman horse trainer. Who would hire me? Someone who cares more about results than conventions, Finn replied. Then, impulsively, he added, I would. Surprise flickered across her features. What do you mean? Finn hadn't meant to say it, but having done so, he continued. I've been saving, nearly have enough for a small spread in the Nebraska territory, good water, decent grazing land. He met her gaze directly. It would need horses, good ones. The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Abigail stared at him, uncertainty written across her features. You're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything specific, Finn clarified quickly. Only that there might be options you haven't considered, choices that don't involve marrying a man who sees you as damaged goods. Before she could respond, the stable door opened. Walton stood there, his expression thunderous. There you are, he said to Abigail, ignoring Finn completely. Your father is waiting to finalize our arrangement. His emphasis on the word our was unmistakable. Abigail straightened, her hand going to Penny's neck as if drawing strength from the animal. I'll be there shortly, Mr. Walton. Now, Abigail, he insisted, his tone brooking no argument. The contracts are prepared. She hesitated, then nodded, very well. As she moved to follow Walton, she paused beside Finn. Thank you, she whispered, for suggesting possibilities. Finn watched them go, a complicated mix of emotions churning within him. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, believing that survival on the frontier meant standing alone. Yet here he was, all but offering a future to a woman he barely knew, simply because something in her called to something in him, a recognition of shared loneliness perhaps, or a glimpse of possibility he'd long denied himself. An hour later, Finn and Peterson rode out, heading back to the scattered herd. Finn didn't look back at the ranch house, though he felt its pull like a physical thing. Whatever was happening there, whatever choices Abigail was making, were beyond his control now. The days that followed were consumed with the work of gathering the remaining cattle and resuming the drive to Billings. Finn threw himself into the task, grateful for the physical demands that left little time for reflection. Yet in the quiet moments during night watches or in the stillness of dawn, his thoughts invariably returned to Abigail and the sadness in her eyes. Had she signed the contracts? Was she now promised to Walton, her future secured at the cost of her happiness? The questions haunted him, though he had no right to answers. On the 12th day, as they made camp within sight of Billings, Peterson approached Finn by the fire. You've been mighty quiet this trip, the older man observed, pouring coffee from the battered pot. Finn shrugged, just focused on the job. Peterson snorted. It's the Buchanan girl, isn't it? Saw how you looked at her. I don't know what you mean, Finn replied stiffly. Sure you do, Peterson settled beside him, not judging. She's a pretty thing even if she is damaged goods. Finn's jaw tightened. She's not damaged. Barren women don't fetch much out here, Peterson continued, oblivious to Finn's growing anger. Buchanan's lucky Walton's willing to take her off his hands. She's not a commodity to be bought and sold, Finn snapped, surprising them both with his vehemence. Peterson studied him over the rim of his cup. You sweet on her. I just think she deserves better than being traded to a man who sees her as convenient, Finn muttered. Maybe so, but that's the way of things out here. Practical considerations trump sentiment every time. Peterson drained his coffee. Best forget her. By the time we get back, she'll be Mrs. Walton, and that'll be that. The words struck Finn like a physical blow, though he knew they were likely true. Women on the frontier had few options outside of marriage, and fewer still if they were considered defective in some way. Abigail's inability to bear children marked her as less valuable in a world where producing the next generation of homesteaders was a woman's primary function. Yet the thought of her resigned to a loveless marriage with a man who valued her only for what she could provide, care for his existing children, felt deeply wrong. That night, as Finn took his watch, he found himself staring at the stars and remembering Abigail's dream of a small place of her own, with horses and a garden. It was a modest dream, but one that spoke of independence and self-determination, qualities the frontier both demanded and denied women. The cattle sale in Billings went smoothly. The buyer Buchanan had arranged paid a fair price, commending Finn on the condition of the herd despite the delays. After settling accounts and ensuring the cattle were properly transferred, Finn found himself with a decision to make: return to the Broken Spoke with Peterson and the others, or continue on his own path. The sensible choice was clear: take his pay, thank Buchanan for the opportunity, and move on. There was ranch work to be had farther north, or he could finally visit that parcel in Nebraska he'd been saving for. Returning to the Broken Spoke meant facing whatever had transpired between Abigail and Walton, a situation he had no right to interfere with. Yet as he sat in the Billings hotel room, counting his share of the cattle proceeds, Finn knew he couldn't simply ride away. Something had shifted in him during those brief encounters with Abigail, a recognition that the solitary existence he'd embraced might be less about survival and more about fear. Fear of loss, of vulnerability, of caring too much in a world that took without mercy. The next morning, instead of joining Peterson and the others on the trail back to the ranch, Finn visited a Billings bank and deposited most of his earnings. Then he purchased supplies for a solo journey, telling Peterson he had business elsewhere and would return to collect the remainder of his pay from Buchanan later. "Suit yourself," Peterson said with a knowing look. "But like I said, she'll be Mrs. Walton by now. No point tormenting yourself." Finn merely nodded, unwilling to explain that his return wasn't about disrupting any arrangement, but about keeping his word. He'd told Buchanan he'd see the job through, and collecting his final payment was part of that obligation. If Abigail had indeed married Walton in his absence, he would wish her well and continue on his way. The journey back to the Broken Spoke took 4 days of hard riding. As the familiar outlines of the ranch appeared on the horizon, Finn felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Whatever he found there would determine his next steps. The ranch seemed unusually quiet as he approached. No hands visible in the yards, no smoke from the bunkhouse chimney. Only the main house showed signs of occupation, a thin wisp of smoke rising from its stone chimney against the late afternoon sky. Finn stabled Thunder, noting that Penny's stall stood empty. The discovery sent an odd pang through him. Had Abigail left with Walton already, taken her beloved mare to her new home in Helena? He approached the main house cautiously, uncertain of his welcome. His knock was answered by Martha, who seemed unsurprised to see him. "Mr. Voss," she greeted him, "we weren't expecting you back." "I've come to settle accounts with Mr. Buchanan," Finn explained. "Peterson said the cattle sale went well." Martha nodded. "Harold will be pleased to hear it. He's in his study." She stepped back to allow him entry. "He's much improved, though still confined mostly to the house." Finn followed her through the familiar hallway, noting the unusual silence of the house. "Is Miss Abigail at home?" Martha's steps faltered slightly. "No, she is not." The confirmation of what he'd suspected, that Abigail had already departed with her new husband, settled like a stone in Finn's stomach. He'd known it was the likely outcome, yet the reality of it still struck him with surprising force. Buchanan was seated behind his desk, his splinted leg propped on a stool. He looked up from his papers with evident surprise. Voss, didn't expect to see you again. Peterson said you had business elsewhere. I do, Finn confirmed, but I wanted to conclude our arrangement properly. The cattle sale went well, better than expected given the delays. Your buyer was pleased with the condition of the herd. Buchanan nodded approvingly. Good, good. Sit down then, Martha, bring us some whiskey. As Martha departed, Finn took the offered chair. I understand congratulations might be in order. Mrs. Buchanan mentioned that Miss Abigail is not at home. Buchanan's expression darkened suddenly. No, she is not, and there are no congratulations to be offered. Finn frowned, confused by the response. I don't understand. My daughter, Buchanan said, his voice tight with controlled anger, chose to disgrace herself rather than honor the arrangement made on her behalf. She fled the night after you left for Billings, took her horse and what little money she could gather and vanished. Shock rendered Finn momentarily speechless. Abigail had run. The quiet, seemingly resigned young woman had found the courage to defy her father and Walton. Did she leave a note, any indication of where she was going? He asked, struggling to keep his tone neutral. Nothing useful, Buchanan growled. Some nonsense about making her own way, as if a woman alone stands any chance on the frontier. He shook his head in disgust. Walton was furious, of course. Withdrew his offer immediately. Martha returned with the whiskey, her face carefully expressionless as she placed the glasses on the desk. 2 weeks she's been gone, Buchanan continued after taking a long swallow. No word. For all I know, she's dead in a ditch somewhere, or worse. The possibilities hung in the air, grim and unspoken. The frontier was unforgiving to those traveling alone, doubly so for a young woman with limited resources and experience. I'm sorry to hear it, Finn said, meaning it sincerely. Despite his private relief that Abigail had escaped a loveless marriage, he was genuinely concerned for her safety. Perhaps she sought shelter with friends or relatives. She has none, Martha said quietly, speaking for the first time on the matter. At least none that Harold approves of. Buchanan shot his wife a warning look. That's enough, Martha, he turned back to Finn. Let's settle your account and be done with it. I've no desire to discuss family matters further. The business was concluded quickly. Buchanan paid the agreed amount, adding a small bonus for Finn's management of the cattle sale. Throughout the transaction, Finn's mind raced with questions and possibilities. Where had Abigail gone? How was she surviving? What had given her the courage to flee? As he prepared to leave, Finn hesitated at the study door. Mr. Buchanan, if I may ask, what will you do about your daughter? Buchanan's expression hardened. Nothing, she made her choice. If she returns, repentant and willing to accept the consequences of her actions, she may find forgiveness. If not, he shrugged, the gesture eloquent in its finality. Outside, as Finn checked Thunder's saddle for the journey ahead, Martha appeared at his elbow. Mr. Voss, she said quietly, glancing toward the house to ensure they weren't overheard. A moment, if you please. Finn paused, curious about her furtive manner. Yes, ma'am. Martha pressed a folded paper into his hand. This came yesterday. I haven't shown it to Harold, I thought. Perhaps you might want to see it. Puzzled, Finn unfolded the paper. It was a brief note, the handwriting delicate but hurried. Mother. I am safe and well, please don't worry for me. I have found employment with Mrs. Elena Wright at her boarding house in Sweetwater. She is kind and the work is honest. I cannot come home while father insists on the arrangement with Mr. Walton. Please understand that I must try to make my own way. With love. Abigail. Finn read the words twice, relief washing through him at the confirmation that she was alive and safe, at least for now. She went to Sweetwater, he asked, looking up at Martha. That's only 20 miles from here. Martha nodded. Elena Wright is an old friend of mine, a widow who runs a respectable establishment. I suspect she took Abigail in as a favor to me, though we haven't corresponded in years. She hesitated, then added, Harold forbade any connection after Elena spoke against his treatment of Abigail following her illness. Finn carefully refolded the note and handed it back. Why show this to me, Mrs. Buchanan? Martha studied him with shrewd eyes. Because I saw how you looked at my daughter, Mr. Voss, and more importantly, I saw how she looked at you. For the first time in years, there was hope in her eyes. The words struck Finn with unexpected force. I barely know her, he protested weakly. Perhaps, but you saw her, truly saw her, when most, including her father, saw only what she couldn't provide. Martha's gaze was direct. Abigail has always been the gentle one. Taking this step couldn't have been easy for her. What are you suggesting, Mrs. Buchanan? Finn asked, though he suspected he knew. I'm not suggesting anything, she replied. Merely sharing information that might be of interest to someone heading in the direction of Sweetwater. With that, she turned and walked back to the house, leaving Finn to contemplate the implications of her words and the decision before him. The logical course was clear: continue with his original plan. He had business to attend to, a future to secure. Abigail had made her choice and found safety, at least temporarily. There was no reason for him to involve himself further in her life. Yet as he mounted Thunder and rode away from the broken spoke, Finn found himself turning not north toward his intended destination, but east, toward Sweetwater and the woman who had shown more courage than he'd given her credit for. Sweetwater was a modest frontier town, a single main street lined with the usual establishments: general store, saloon, blacksmith, small church, and a few businesses catering to the surrounding ranches. The Wright boarding house stood at the far end, a two-story clapboard building with a small porch and neat curtains in the windows. Finn approached cautiously, uncertain of his reception or even what he intended to say. He'd spent the journey rehearsing explanations, but none seemed adequate to justify his appearance after their brief acquaintance. He tied Thunder to the hitching post and climbed the porch steps. Before he could knock, the door opened to reveal a stout woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled into a severe bun. "Can I help you, young man?" she asked, her tone polite but reserved. "Yes, ma'am. I'm looking for Miss Abigail Buchanan. I was told she might be employed here." The woman's expression immediately became guarded. "And who might be asking?" "My name is Finn Voss. I worked briefly for her father." "Harold Buchanan send you to fetch her back?" the woman, presumably Mrs. Wright, asked suspiciously. "No, ma'am, her father doesn't know I'm here. I just wanted to make sure she was all right." "Mrs. Wright studied him for a long moment, as if assessing his character and intentions. Finally, she nodded. "Wait here." She disappeared inside, leaving Finn on the porch with his hat in his hands and his heart inexplicably racing. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Abigail stood there, wearing a simple work dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid. She looked tired but somehow more vibrant than he remembered, as if some inner light had been kindled. "Finn," she said, surprise evident in her voice, "what are you doing here?" "I came to check on you," he admitted. "Your mother showed me your note. I was concerned." A small smile touched her lips. "You were worried about me." "The frontier's dangerous for anyone traveling alone," he said, then added more honestly, "but yes, I was worried." She stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "How did the cattle drive conclude?" "Was my father very angry?" "The drive went well, and yes, your father is furious," Finn replied, "though I think your mother secretly approves of your courage." Abigail leaned against the porch railing. "It wasn't courage so much as desperation. After our conversation, I couldn't go through with it. I kept hearing your words about choices." She looked up at him. "I decided I had to try making my own way, even if it meant uncertainty." Pride swelled in Finn's chest at her determination. "And how is it working out?" "It's hard," she admitted. "The work here is demanding and the pay modest, but Mrs. Wright is kind, and for the first time I'm supporting myself." She straightened slightly. "I'm learning that I'm capable of more than I thought." "I never doubted it," Finn said quietly. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with unspoken questions and possibilities. "Will you stay in Sweetwater?" Finn finally asked. Abigail shook her head. "I can't, it's too close to home. Father will eventually learn where I am, and I'm not ready to face him." She hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Wright has a sister in Laramie who runs a larger boarding house. She's written to ask if I might find a position there." "Laramie," Finn repeated. It was a considerable distance, further from her father's influence but also from anything familiar. "Yes. It's an opportunity for a fresh start." She studied his face. "And you, where are you headed?" The question hung between them, weighted with potential. Finn had spent the journey to Sweetwater questioning his own motives, examining the beliefs that had guided him for so long. The conviction that attachment was dangerous, that survival meant standing alone, beliefs born of loss and reinforced by years on the frontier. Yet here was Abigail, who had taken an enormous risk to claim her own future, who had rejected safety for the chance at something more meaningful. Her courage challenged him to examine his own fears. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "I've been thinking about that land in Nebraska I mentioned. It's good country, needs work, but it has potential." "Potential is valuable," Abigail said softly, echoing their earlier conversations. "More valuable than most realize." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Finn took a deep breath, deciding that if she could be brave, so could he. "Abigail, I know we've only just met, really. But I can't stop thinking about you, about your courage, your dreams." He met her gaze directly. "I meant what I said about needing someone who understands horses for that land in Nebraska, but it's more than that, I think. I think we might build something good there, together." Surprise flashed across her features, followed by something softer. "Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Voss, or something else?" "Both." "Neither." Finn ran a hand through his hair in frustration at his own inarticulateness. "I'm proposing a partnership, in all things, if you're willing." "You know what they say about me," she said quietly, "that I'm barren. Damaged goods." Finn stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I know what they say, I don't care. There are many ways to build a family, Abigail, many ways to create a legacy." He squeezed her hands gently. "What I care about is who you are, your strength, your kindness, your dreams. The rest is just details." Tears gathered in Abigail's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "You hardly know me." "I know enough," Finn replied. "I know you have the courage to seek your own path. I know you dream of horses and gardens and a place to call your own. I know that when I'm with you, I feel less alone than I have in years." He paused, then added with a small smile, "The rest we can discover together, if you want to." "And if I can't give you children?" she asked, the question clearly important to her. "Then we'll find other ways to fill our lives with purpose and joy," Finn answered without hesitation. "The frontier needs more than just offspring, Abigail. It needs people who see potential where others see limitations. Who build rather than merely survive." A tear slipped down her cheek, but her smile never wavered. "I think I'd like to see this land in Nebraska," she said softly. "It sounds like it has promise." "It does," Finn agreed. "Like us." 2 months later, under a clear Nebraska sky, Finn and Abigail Voss stood on the porch of their newly constructed cabin. It was modest, 2 rooms with a stone chimney, but it was theirs. Behind it stretched 15 acres of good grazing land, bordered by a creek that never ran dry. In the small corral, Thunder and Penny grazed alongside 2 promising young colts purchased with their combined savings. "What do you think?" Finn asked, his arm around his wife's waist as they surveyed their domain. "Can you be happy here?" Abigail leaned into his embrace, her expression peaceful. "I already am." Their wedding had been a simple affair in Laramie, with Mrs. Wright and her sister as witnesses. Abigail had written to her mother with the news, receiving in return a brief note of congratulation and a small sum of money, Martha's personal savings, sent in secret. From Harold Buchanan there had been only silence. "I've been thinking," Abigail said, turning in Finn's arms to face him, "about expanding." Finn raised an eyebrow. "The house?" "It is a bit small, but I thought we'd wait until spring to add the extra room." She shook her head, her eyes alight with purpose. "Not the house, the business. You were right about my way with horses. The colts are coming along well, and there's talk in town about the new stage line needing good stock." She hesitated, then continued more confidently. "I think we could specialize in breeding and training quality horses, build a reputation." Finn studied his wife with pride and no small amount of wonder. In the months since she'd fled her father's control, Abigail had blossomed, revealing an intelligence, determination, and business sense that might have remained forever dormant had she accepted the role others defined for her. "I think it's a fine idea," he said. "Voss Horse Farm has a good sound to it. And later, perhaps we might consider taking in one of those orphans Reverend Miller mentioned," Abigail added, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. There are so many children who need homes, especially after the war. Finn's heart swelled at the suggestion. I think that would be perfect. This is a good place to raise a child. Abigail's smile was radiant. You really don't mind that I can't give you children of your own. They would be our own, Abigail, Finn said firmly. Our family built through choice rather than chance. He cupped her face gently. Besides, who's to say what's possible or impossible? Doctors have been wrong before. And if they're not wrong this time, then we'll still have a full life and a loving home to share, Finn assured her. There are many kinds of legacy, my love. As the sun set over their small but promising kingdom, Finn reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He had spent years believing that survival on the frontier meant standing apart, avoiding the vulnerabilities that came with attachment. Abigail had been raised to believe her value lay solely in what her body could or couldn't provide. Both had been wrong. The frontier's harsh realities didn't demand isolation but connection, the strength that came from building something together, from seeing potential where others saw only limitation. I love you, Abigail said softly, as if reading his thoughts, for seeing me. Not what I couldn't be, but who I am. Finn kissed her gently. I love you for the same reason, for helping me understand that surviving isn't enough, that living, truly living, means taking risks. Building something worth protecting. As darkness settled around their homestead, a coyote called from the distant hills, a reminder of the wilderness that surrounded them. But within the circle of their embrace, within the boundaries of the life they were creating together, there was only warmth, possibility, and the quiet certainty that they had found their true home in each other.